You're listening to the Clutter Fairy Weekly, a weekly webcast and podcast brought to you by the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas. If you'd like to participate in one of our live webcasts, please visit cfhou.com/weekly. You'll find a calendar of upcoming webcasts, as well as instructions for joining the Zoom meeting via the app or by phone. We'd love to see you. That URL again is cfhou.com/weekly. Now here's the weekly episode. Enjoy.
Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. This is the Clutter Fairy Weekly for December 10th, 2024. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, certified professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is the webcast and podcast that digs deep into the clutter that piles up between you and the life that you want to be living. We explore the habits and behaviors that lead to clutter, and we suggest strategies to slow the accumulation, reduce the collection, and comfortably manage the stuff we decide to keep.
If you're new to our Zoom meeting, we want to let you know that you can share your comments and questions via the chat feature, and I'll try to make sure Gayle addresses them before we move on to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question via audio or video. And we're streaming the webcast live on Facebook, so you can share your questions and comments there, and I'll share them with Gayle. We're going to start by recapping last week's weekly tittle, which was called Interrogate Your Ghosts. The assignment was to evaluate and exercise a ghost, in quotes, of your past or future. Let's hear from our participants in Zoom and on Facebook. Who eliminated an item of clutter connected to your past or saved for the just-in-case future this week? Please let us know in the comments. YouTube viewer GingerSnap1568 examined memorabilia this week and coined 2 new terms that we're going to be adding to the Clutter Fairy vocabulary. She shared a new decluttering question that she's going to ask as she evaluates her collections. GingerSnap asks, is it a keepsake or a cheapsake? A poor quality item or one with low or even negative sentimental value? She says, this also led me to heapsake, an item out of a heap of stuff that I'm never going to use.
Oh my God. Those are very funny. Let me just say, love those so much. I really like cheapsake. Very insightful things to label them, I have to say. Cheapsake perfectly describes those items that we keep that are low quality, useless items we've randomly collected, or the things that you've kept that remind you of negative events in your life, negative people in your life, bad situations that you had. I have decluttered a lot of cheapsakes from people's houses when I could hear this is a collection of stuff from the ex-husband. This is the collection of the stuff from the job where I got fired. This is the evidence of the time where my friend took advantage of me, and here's all the emails we exchanged. Or, people keep things that remind them of sad, distressing, upsetting, violating events. And I'm always like, why do you want to keep the reminders of your husband cheating on you? Why? Why would you want that in your life? No need for that. So that's a cheapsake.
I
It
think
needs to go.
I think a cheapsake could also be like an embarrassingly crappy gift that someone bought you, right?
Right, exactly.
And a heapsake could also be like, that thing of value. I'm putting value in quotation marks. That
Right,
thing of
right.
value you dug out of a box of stuff that you were ready to throw away. That's a heapsake.
It went into the box on the way to the garage to go to donation, and then you shopped it back. Is that
Right?
Yeah, I see that. No, that needs to go. And that is a heapsake. I love those word modifications. They make me super happy. And I think that they imply exactly what you're trying to say. And so great job. Great job figuring out a way to evaluate your collections and see them through a different lens. And we're adding cheapsake and heapsake to our terms around here because they were very good. Thanks for sharing them.
Okay, we have some tittle reports coming in. CJ says, eliminated the pantry's warehouse of expired food I thought I wanted to cook and eat, but never did, even during the COVID shortages.
That's a good one. That's a very good one. No point in storing food that is never coming out of the pantry.
I think there are probably still a lot of people in our audience who could get rid of some stuff that has 2022 and 23 expiration dates.
Right? That went a little banana fanas during the pandemic and then,
Right.
it hasn't been eating them.
Catherine reports doing some crafts decluttering.
Oh, that's always good.
Eclair says more clothes and shoes from my old job
Oh,
gone
excellent.
away. Let's see.
That's a good one.
Diane says getting ready for new furniture, have to pick up things and get decorations up too. So that's her assignment this week.
So you got stuff going on. You got to make space for the things that are coming. That's great. So take it as an opportunity because you have to clear the path. Yeah, a piece of furniture is a big footprint, and you're having to clear out a pathway. So don't just move stuff around or go stash things in corners. Use this as an opportunity to touch it and decide if it needs to live with you still. And if it doesn't, you can jettison it out because you're making space for a piece of furniture to come in. So maybe you want to give away an equivalent amount of stuff to the size of the piece of furniture that's coming in. Just a thought.
M reports I didn't do the tittle directly. I got involved in the survey on collections, which in my case also has to do with expectations of the future.
Hmm.
I came to the realization that the activity of compiling a collection strengthens the bond to it. So I have to think about the stuff differently.
It totally does because that's part of the fun, right? Is generating a collection. It doesn't spontaneously come to be all at once, and there's some hunt involved, and there's some education involved as you teach yourself about what's available and what the options are, and you start exploring where can I get pieces of this collection and who sells it and where is it acquired and how often does it change and how many options are there, and you start getting all up into the details of it, and that all creates attachment because part of that is the fun of collecting is that you become an expert in this area of the stuff that you're into, and that learning process and that exploration process and that hunting process is all part of the fun of collecting, but then you're left with the results of collecting. So I think it's the one thing that people who collect don't build into their process is, and everybody that makes money on collecting collects and then resells stuff out. And I think, although you don't have to become a reseller, it makes sense that as you collect and add to the collection and you learn more about the contents of the collection, you will find that some of the things that you collected early on aren't the best examples, aren't the most, collectible, the most popular, whatever. And you can add in a process of filtering out later. As you add in new, you can release old that doesn't elevate your collection in the same way anymore. It is a process of people start collecting and they only think about adding, adding, adding. But it is part of responsible curating of your collection to thin out things that once were early collections, early buys into the collection, but that have been superseded by better choices you made later as you've been more educated, or you found better sources, or you've, found the hidey hole where the guy has the best options. And so making that shift to let some of it go at the same time as you're collecting is a more responsible way to manage any kind of collection like that.
Lee's reports going through Christmas stuff, still
Mm.
working on it, and hope to finish with my daughter on Thursday.
Awesome. Perfect timing. Perfect
And
timing to offer it to somebody else.
our final tittle report comes from Rosemary, who says, there were a lot of seasonings that had expired in my pantry, and I went through them and threw them away. The question I want to ask Rosemary is, did you get rid of any rosemary? Had to ask.
That's good. And spices, their shelf life is longer than the average food that you buy in the pantry. and they're small containers. And so it always seems like, well, they don't take up very much space. But then if you add spices for 20 years and you never subtract, then they gather a footprint. They become, larger than life. And so it's a perfect thing. Although it has a slightly longer age life than the average pantry does, it's like a subset pantry that also needs churning and refreshing. And so good for you for doing it. Good for you for taking it on. It's a perfect thing to thin out.
Okay, I lied. One more comment. Ginger says, I hear cheat sake. So I think that's she
Cheat
says,
sake.
do I need to delete my file labeled The Thief? Years ago, I was scammed online by an online seller. I paid through PayPal and she kept giving me a line until enough time passed that I couldn't request it back through PayPal.
Oh,
Years later, Facebook, I found her and family. I thought of retribution, but I let it go. All but the evidence. Time to bless her heart and flush.
yes, absolutely.
So yeah,
Because you
cheat,
don't need to keep that emotional tie to something that makes you feel bad and taken advantage of, right? Like, let
right.
that go for the new year. That's a perfect thing to
So,
surrender.
so a cheat sake, this is yet another new term we can add. A cheat sake is a memento of a time that you were scammed
Or
or
taken advantage of.
taken
Yeah.
advantage of, or perhaps, cheated on.
Yes,
That could
yes,
be a
yes.
cheat sake as well.
Yes, I have a client who has her husband after, the kids were long grown, like they'd been married for 20 years or something, 25 years, and he cheated on somebody. I mean, he cheated on her with somebody, and he did the whole, buy jewelry on the sly,
Oh my
stay at
gosh.
hotels outside, like all this stuff, just like a show. And she figured it out and started collecting evidence. And there was some, I don't know all the details, but I do know that they ended up with lawyers trying to get divorced. Ah, the evidence trail somebody's posting. Yes, exactly. Like she has this big notebook of the evidence of all the things that he did that she felt like were wrong and painful. And I've asked more than one time, are you ready to let that go? Like y'all have been divorced almost as long as you were married now. Like you have grandkids. He's remarried the person, he married the person that he cheated with. Like that ship is a decade down the road. And why she still holds on to that binder of all the evidence she collected of being cheated on is beyond me. It's like, what do you get out of looking at this now after y'all's relationship is dead and gone and the papers are signed and it's all changed? And what is the point of looking at this now? And I just can't talk her out of it. And there's some attachment to keeping the wound oozing somehow. Mail it to the new wife. Right? That's a good one, Em. Thank you. That's funny. That's a good point. And clearly I'm not her therapist and I'm not her best friend and there's only so much advice I can give her around this. But I keep asking. I've worked with her for several years and every once in a while it went through a paper sort and it went through a move process and every time I put my hands on it again, we have the conversation again. It's like, are you ready to let go of this yet? And
Almost.
yeah, yeah, no, apparently not yet. That's a good one though.
All
Thank you
right.
guys. Y'all are being clever today.
Let's move on to our main topic or our first of a couple of topics we have prepared.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll get to both of them, but we're going to try. An audience member asked us how many items in each category is healthy, excessive but okay, way too much. To arrive at an answer, we need to consider the category, the context, and the limits of your space, money, time, and energy, and more. Today, we're going to consider the question, how many is too many, and discuss other short topics suggested by our viewers and listeners.
So an anonymous viewer wrote to us to ask us how many items in each category is healthy, excessive but okay, or way too much. And some people might be hoping to hear us make a statement like 5 watches is a reasonable number of watches. And we get it. We totally get it. Limits and constraints can be very empowering. And if we knew what the right answer was for everyone at all times, we would be happy to share it with you.
We absolutely would.
We would absolutely be willing to tell you. That's our thing, right? But the answer to these questions are always going to be really personal, subjective, and determined by your space and your circumstances. So the bad news is that you're the one who have to set the constraints. What might constitute too many for someone else could be just right for you. The good news is that we can still suggest guidelines to help you set reasonable limits to keep your collections under control. So let's start by talking about some survey results. Inspired by the original questions from our viewer, we asked our audience a series of 3 questions designed to dig into areas where they might have a problem of excess. First, we asked the viewers to describe a collection or a category of items in your home that you're worried might have crossed over into too many or too much. Next, we asked for the category or collection described, what factors contribute to your assessment of the stash as excessive? What makes you think it's excessive? Then we dug deeper still and asked for the category or collection described, what would you consider a reasonable limit? We also asked you to explain how you arrived at your answer, and let's look at some of these responses.
Okay, Yvonne identified purses as her problem category. She says she bought an IKEA shelf to store and display them since they're all pretty expensive, but now she has more than will fit on the shelf. She says her limit ought to be obvious. To quote Dana K. White, the shelf is the container, and I should keep them confined to the container that I bought for them.
I agree with Ms. White, Ms. Dana. Ms. White has the right answer. The container is the limit. You have a shelving unit that you're using, and it's obviously the limiting factor there. But since you've already outstripped that shelf because you're still buying purses, I think you have to ask yourself, how attached am I to this collection? Will I keep buying purses? Seems likely. Then I need to expand my ability to store and display. How much display and storage am I willing to add to my house before it becomes too much? At what point am I collecting beyond what my house can store and display? You've already overrun the first container you've chosen. How much farther do you want this collection to encroach into your living space in your house? Consider that now before you grow the collection more. Your house can only hold so much, and you'll have to surrender living space to house it. That choice of purses versus living space is yours to make. And I just want to insert here as well, all of the shows that you watch that show fancy walk-in closets with a deck in the middle, you know, like the cabinet in the middle or a couch to sit on. These are all large rooms in a large house that makes their closet look like a store. And sure, in that environment, you can have a quantity of stuff just like a store. But if you don't have that house and you don't have that closet and you don't have that space, then you are taking that space for your collection out of some other living area in the house. Often it's out of your own bedroom, out of the hall, out of the guest closet, out of the guest room. I've seen people turn rooms into closets. And so this is a place where, for me, a shelving unit of purses is sufficient. If you want more than that, then you are going to have more display and more furniture or more ways to hang things on the wall that are going to hold purses, and it becomes a display room and a display piece and a display wall. It becomes decor, basically. And if and if that's what you want to show, then you need to plan around that. But I would recognize that every time you go back to the store and get another purse, you're increasing the burden of what you have to display, and you're taking away living space from yourself. And so the ultimate container is your house. And you know that you can stuff it pretty full. We have all, worked at that capacity to wedge as much as possible into a house. And so you're at some point you're going to fill the cubic volume of your house too. And all the purses are going to be in pins or they're going to be all over the wall or whatever. I mean, that collection can grow to take over a huge amount of your space in your house. And so now's the time to decide what amount of house am I surrendering to this collection? And when I reach that amount, if I continue to buy, how am I going to make it work? What am I going to surrender to add new? There will be a point where your container is full, whatever you define that container as, and you will have to create an in and out policy. If you want to keep collecting beyond your container, then you have to subtract items in order to add new. And figuring out what those parameters are about how you release stuff is how you're going to manage this collection over the long haul. There.
Okay. Lynn's problem category is her mom's cut glass crystal dishware collection. Lynn says, when I spend more time cleaning, maintaining, and rearranging things than actually using or enjoying them, that's when it is time to reevaluate their continued existence in my house.
Exactly.
Lynn goes on to say, if I have to acquire more storage containers or real estate for an item, there are too many, and it's time to thin the herd. For the most part, I try to use the one in, one out strategy.
One in, one out's a great strategy, of course. But since the cut glass collection was your mom's collection, actually, I don't see that you're growing the collection. I don't get the impression from what you've written that you're adding to this collection. You're just existing with a collection you inherited. So for you, you've hit the nail on the head. The time that you're spending cleaning and maintaining that collection versus the time that you actually use the collection shows that it was your mom's collection and not yours. I think thinning down the volume to a few representative samples that are really special to you or that you think are the best, the cream of the crop of her collection, and then passing on the rest would be a good adjustment to make. You can keep a nod to your mother's collection by keeping the best pieces, and you can relieve the burden of care that you're doing right now by letting the bulk of the collection become someone else's to collect going forward. So, you can keep this a sampling of your mother's collection that you find particularly appealing, and in that way make it your collection and let the rest of it go so you're only cleaning your favorites
Yeah.
and the rest can go be collected by somebody else.
Okay, an anonymous respondent mentioned scissors as a problem item, and scissors is a collection is a an example I remember you giving long ago when you were doing Conquering Clutter 101. Um,
5 most common organizing mistakes.
right? Uh, um, this respondent says she bought more than 10 pairs without realizing I already have a lot. But now that all the scissors are in the same place, she can see she has too many in total. She thinks that 6 pairs should probably be enough.
And that's exactly why we sort like with like, because that way you can see that you have 20 pairs of scissors and that is unnecessary excess for whatever you need in scissors in the house. Faced with all of the choices, when you sort them all together like you have, then it's easier to choose the best ones, accounting for all the possible needs in your house. Like, I need kitchen shears, I need fabric scissors, I need paper scissors, I need small precision scissors, and etc. And then letting the excess go to the next person. It makes those choices 1,000 times easier when you put all the scissors in one pile and go, okay, why am I keeping all these scissors? Oh yeah, I need this one for that, and this one for that, and this one for that. You could say they're all useful. You could say that they're all, everybody needs scissors. That's true. But do you really need, 30 pairs of scissors? No. You can pick 6 or 5 or whatever the number is based on how many uses you think you have. And that should solve the problem. You can put a pair of scissors in every room. Somebody's suggesting that, and that's fine. There's still a maximum capacity of scissors that you need, and the rest can go on about their business. So it's a very fair point. And once you sort like with like, and you're looking at the whole collection, it makes it a lot easier to realize that you have an excess and that you can keep the best and let the rest go.
So the short answer to the question, how many is too many, is start by sorting like with like
Yes,
to
step
get to
one.
get to your own answer.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
Jean
Mhm.
told us I seem to have many watches. She found our she saw our graphic and remembered she has a lot of watches. And I have not worn one nor purchased one in 25 years. She goes on to say, I don't know what to do with them. None are telling me what time it is. And she concludes that one seems to be the right number for her nowadays.
Oh, wow. So Gina's telling us that there was a time when she wore watches, but since it's been 25 years since she's worn or bought one, I'd say that this is either a sentimental collection or it's one that's been ignored and becoming visible to her over all that time. Like she somehow collected the 25 watches or, the big collection of watches, but it's been 2.5 decades since she actually paid any attention to them. So it's really a collection that has faded into the background for her, I guess is the way to say that. And in that case, then setting the limits is really easy. It's a very low use collection and it can be filtered for sentimental attachment, and the rest can be moved along. I myself might keep a few favorites, but probably a very low number of them. And if this was someone else and they were still actively wearing and collecting the watches regularly, then the amount of watches to keep might be relatively larger instead of, one that she suggests for herself, one. If you have a sentimental attachment to some of the watches, maybe there's a few more. But if you're not actively using them, then there's really no point to keep a whole lot. Someone that matches their watches with their clothes, changes them all the time, wears them every day, that person will have a larger number of watches to keep. And even such a person could go through the collection and let the non-favored watches be released. And so if she's like, wow, I have a lot of watches and one's probably enough, then there you go. She's making that collection a collection of one to reflect the fact that she hasn't really worn things for 25 years. So I think uh, I think that's a you're creating a parameter that works for your attention and focus on this collection. And now it's time to let it go, right? Move them along.
I am at zero watches.
Really?
I do not wear a watch, and I didn't wear a watch even before I carried around this, device in my pocket that told me what time it was whenever I needed to know. I'm just not really a watch guy. I'm not a jewelry person. And I suppose that between the last time I had a watch in my preteen years and the advent of mobile phones, I just, figured out what time it was by asking other people or finding a clock on a wall.
Right.
Okay, Selena says her excessive collection is acrylic paints. She writes, I have two tiny sets I've barely begun using, and one huge set I bought because it was discounted. Recently, I bought another medium-sized set. Yes, another discount. She traces the source of the problem to the mismatch between the speed at which she buys supplies and the rate at which she uses them up. She suggests a limit of one or two at most sets, um, because acrylic paints dry out and become unusable fairly quickly.
So you mentioned the most important factor here that the acrylic paints have a shelf life, after which they dry out and are useless. I've often laughed with my friends that buying craft supplies is a separate hobby from crafting with those supplies. Shopping for craft stuff is fast and easy. Using them requires a plan, dedicated time, a set of skills, maybe a pattern or instructions. It takes more to get started and to see results we like. Recognizing that you have more paints than you can use up before they spoil is your signal that one, you cannot shop for any more right now, regardless of the discounts. And two, you need to do some painting to use up the paints that you have and get to a place where buying more paints makes sense. Time to stop shopping and start creating. Craft shopping needs to wait right now. And so, um, crafters, you know that you recognize yourself in this. It's not just acrylic paint. All people that are into crafting love the shopping that goes with crafting. But when shopping is the only thing you're doing, You're just making the collection bigger for no good reason. And you need to work in the whole crafting part of the crafting, the ostensible reason that you're buying the supplies to begin with. You need to indulge yourself in that hobby and that entertainment and enjoy using them up and having fun with them before you go shopping again. Just saying, from, the chick that has a bead store in her house.
Now,
Totally get
you
it.
you are at a disadvantage because beads don't expire,
Bees do not expire.
right?
It's true.
And
They don't have a shelf life.
probably almost nothing you use has any kind of shelf life worth considering, because I'm sure
Actually,
even
the only
your
thing that really does is
Mhm.
some of the beading thread.
Right. But
Sometimes
even
some of the
that,
beading
I'm
thread,
sure is meant to last years and years, right?
some amount of time, yeah. And if you make something out of it and then it dies later, like you don't want your work to come apart. So
Right.
it's important to try to use it while this, it's fresher. I
Yeah.
guess is the best way to say that. And
Okay.
you can reclaim beads too. When you make something and it falls apart, you can cut it apart and the beads are still usable most of the time. So it is, I've long since stopped madly collecting supplies. I have plenty. And while I could go banana fanas and get on Facebook pages and shop, and I could, buy things like crazy at at the shows that I go to, I don't anymore for the express reason that I don't have as much time to craft as I have collection to support me. And so it's not reasonable for me to keep adding at this point. And so I could do anything I wanted with, I'm like looking at my wall right here. I could do anything that I wanted out of the stuff that I have right now, and it would be fine. So there you go.
Also, you know, to me, constraints and limitations are part of what makes art fun. It adds an element of challenge.
And
And
creativity,
so,
right?
yeah, it's like, how about you take your you take your smallest set of acrylics and see what you can paint using only that,
What you can do with it.
you know,
Exactly.
just as an exercise.
In creative stretching, right? Like, that's why they do when you're part of a crafting community, they usually have some place where they're doing a challenge.
Right,
And the challenge is use these three colors.
right,
80% of your project has to be in these three colors or whatever.
right,
And so it's a way to stimulate your creative juices, right?
right.
And your problem solving because they're setting constraints around what you can use. And that's part of the fun too. You're right.
Okay, Noreen wrote to tell us about her mother's collection of willow tree figurines. She says there are about 30 right now. They fit on a shelf in a curio cabinet, so they're not overwhelming, but I know nobody will want them when I'm gone. I'm trying to whittle down the collection slowly. I recently had new floors put in and had to empty the curio cabinet. That made me realize how many of them I had, as well as countless other tchotchkes and crystalline china from my mom and grandma. I'm an only child and the oldest grandchild, so I ended up with the stuff. I would think 5 figurines, most likely the ones I gifted her, would be sufficient to keep.
I agree the figurines you gifted her are a perfect connection between her collection and what you save now. There's no need to maintain her collection. It's time to redefine the collection as yours. And those that you gave her as a gift that's a perfect parameter for you to thin the herd. If you want to share some with the other grandkids, go ahead. If nobody else is interested, then just let others collect the rest. You can go and take them to a resale store. You can go donate them away directly. You can give them to, a church rummage sale, whatever works for you, and let somebody else collect them that is maybe starting a collection not as far along as your mother was.
Okay, so we've talked about some survey responses that are examples of people trying to decide how much is too much, how many is too many. Let's talk about more factors to consider as you're trying to make your own difficult decisions about how much is too much.
Obviously, one of the most important factors to consider is how much space you have available and how much you want to dedicate to this particular collection. That's always that's always the personalized outer container discussion to have in your house, in your space, what space is available for the collection and how much of that space you want to surrender to the collection. And we talked about that in detail earlier, but it's really everybody's house is unique, everybody's spaces are unique. And so you have to evaluate your collections against your space and decide what makes sense for you. How much time are you willing to devote to the curation, storage, arrangement, cleaning, etc. of this collection in question? Also, we nodded to that earlier. If you are spending a whole lot of time arranging and cleaning this collection and not really interacting with it otherwise, or not really using the contents, or it's not out on display where you like looking at it, or you feel enriched by having it available to see, then giving up all of your time to maintain and keep it clean, is it like, how much time do you want to spend on that? That's the bottom line. How much time do you want to spend doing that? And giving up your free time to do something else in order to clean, arrange, store this collection. That's something to think about. How often do you use the items in this category? And the example I have is to remember about Jean's watches. She has watches, she has too many watches, but they're not getting used at all because she's not even wearing a watch. So for her, really thinning the collection makes sense. She needs room for things she's actually using in her space. And the watches are taking up space and she's not even using them at all. She's not wearing them and hasn't done. So it's unlikely that she's suddenly going to become a consumer of watches. She's not going to suddenly start wearing watches again after 25 years of not wearing them. So she's made her preference like Ed. I don't want to wear watches. I'm not into the watches. So having that category, when it, and for her there is no use of the category is not being used at all, then making that collection go away makes perfect sense to me, and it should to you as well. If you're not using it and you're not playing with it and you're not actively curating it, then having a collection that is not interesting or being paid attention to by anyone is a collection that doesn't need to be there.
Right. It's I think we need to, you know, encourage our audience to consider that there may be categories in which the correct answer is zero.
Mm,
You know, you keep these,
yes.
you're keeping these, and the reason that they're still here and haven't already been decluttered is, you know, the answer to that would be something like, well, I might use it, or I could use it.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
so
that's true. You could.
you could, but what is the likelihood?
And based on the fact that it's been there and you haven't used it all this time, I would say the likelihood is low. And respecting the fact that the likelihood is no low means that it makes sense to let it go. Like that pushes it way up the list of things that can leave the house. And yes, it's useful, but you don't have to own and keep all useful things in the universe. You can let that usefulness go to someone else,
Yeah.
right? So if we're talking about a category or a collection that you're still accumulating, you might want to be prudent and think about the money involved. What's your budget for this type of item? And are you going into debt to collect? If you are getting out the credit card in order to buy beads like I did in the beginning, yeah, I don't do that anymore. I cash out beads. I don't credit beads. And I'm acquiring at a 20th of the rate that I did early on in the process. And so if you have to go into debt to collect something, then I think you should reconsider hard about whether you need to collect the stuff. That collection if you're having to go into debt, then that collection seems financially out of your reach, and it's not probably an appropriate collection for you to manage or maintain. And I say that because so many people wake up 20 years down the road and go, oh my God, I have $100,000 invested in Jimmy Choo shoes and I can't even wear them anymore, and I can't possibly get the money back out of them that I invested to get them. And, what was I thinking? And now I have credit card debt, and I've been paying on that credit card debt for years, which means you paid a bunch of interest to own those things. So there's a host of problems that come with I'm using the credit card in order to continue to collect. And that's one that is worth interrupting at the very least. Stop collecting on credit, and be honest with yourself about you may like to collect this stuff, but you don't have the budget for it, or you don't have the budget to collect it at the rate that you want to collect. And being real about, I want to buy 10 a month, but I can only afford to buy one a month. And so that's really all I get to have. And being that budget czar of your own to say, I'm not going to collect myself into crippling debt down the line. And so let's focus on whether I really have the money to be collecting this thing, and what my budget looks like, and what I'm allowed to spend every month on this type of stuff. And otherwise, I need to not be shopping. There you go. That's the
Okay.
ex-CPA discussion about money. You want to consider the context of the collection. If you paint watercolors and sell them for your income, then your collection of 40 watercolor brushes, probably in excess of it, makes sense because you sell them for a living. But if you dabble in watercolors once or twice a year, that collection of 40 paintbrushes has probably crossed over into too many. So having a volume that reflects how much you use it that's a reasonable way to filter it. It's the context of the collection. One that's actively in use, you're wearing the watches all the time, you make them match your clothes, you change them out every day, you coordinate them to what's going on for the season, all that kind of stuff. If you're actively using the collection, it makes more sense to have more variety than if you're not actively using the collection. It's not something that you get into all the time. And so thinking about that is a good way to set parameters around the collection as well. There might be situations that set higher or lower limits for the size of your collection. For example, if you're training for a marathon, you're going to need a large number of running shoes and socks and running apparel. But if you're not, if you just occasionally hit the road for a jog, then the idea of having, a whole closet full of running shoes and 2 drawers of running apparel doesn't really make sense. So making the collection fit the use, the situation of what you're doing. Am I running all the time? Yes. Then having more running apparel and more shoes makes sense. Am I running, when my daughter guilt trips me into it? Then I probably don't need a bunch of shoes, right? Just saying. What about your own values or tastes or passions? These are the things that bring joy, satisfaction, and meaning to your life that other people might not care about at all. If you're crazy about quilts, then your collection of a dozen quilts may be just right, even though you live in Houston, where there's usually only about a half a dozen really cold days a year. Like I have the thinnest quilt possible on my bed, and during the summertime, I'm constantly kicking it off. So that is something that if you're going to have the collection, it needs to be something that you feel passionate about and really interested in. And if you don't feel that connection to the collection, then maybe it's not really your collection. Maybe it's one that you got from somebody else. It was somebody else's passion. It was somebody else's interest, and you've inherited their collection. But if that's not your thing, then it's not really your collection. And so sending it on to somebody else who does collect is a better choice if you have just inherited someone else's passion. Your own passions, it makes more sense to keep some, and you still need to filter for your storage capacity. 12 quilts, dozen quilts. If you're a quilt maker, 40 quilts, there's only so much linen space in any one given house. And so that you aren't actually able to use 40 quilts in your own home. And so that process becomes, how do I make use of these quilts? How many of them are art pieces? how much of them need to be given away because I can't possibly use 40 quilts. Every quilt maker's dilemma. Let's talk about bandwidth next, by which we mean your capacity to think about your collections. Do you own so many items in a certain category that you no longer have a clear picture of what you possess? That's probably a signal that you've got too much. If it takes up way too much bandwidth in your head, like you can't even hold the whole collection in mind, you can't remember all the pieces that you have, then you've swung out into potentially too much, having too much. People that you have a passion about something and you're into all of the pieces of it, and so you can keep up with, I have this 1947, build a car, and I have this 1958 built, little model, and whatever you're passionate about, all the details and all the pieces. But if you are not able to keep up with all the stuff that you have, I think it's time to wonder whether you've sort of reached your mental capacity for how big the collection can be.
You have passed too many.
Right?
L-
Exactly.
Linda had a great comment that anticipated this particular criterion.
Okay.
She said, stuff takes up physical space and also head space. I find
Yes.
that there is stuff that I have plenty of room for, but not the head space to keep track of it.
Right? And if it's not a collection of things that you use, so the need to have it and use it triggers you to go and interact with the collection and remember what pieces are there. Like the pantry is a collection that you interact with and use all the time. You have to go into the pantry to get supplies. And so that's how you sort of refresh yourself, and you don't keep it all in your head. You go into the pantry and touch stuff looking for things to use. And that's how you keep um, the breadth of the collection fresh in your mind because you're constantly touching and handling it. A collection that you don't have a need that drives you to use it, if it's just a collection for fun, if it's not a collection that needs you to sample from it, then you're going to not be remembering everything that's there, and you're not going to be able to store the list in your head, and and then it becomes an excessive collection, right? There's too much of it there. So the next thing you can consider is other people's needs. While you're thinking about it, maybe you want to consider the people you live with. If your collection is it starting to get in the way of the lives of the people with whom you share your space? If so, you may be headed into too many territory of I got too much stuff. And the flip side of other people's needs are the questions: who could benefit if I were to downsize my collection? And to whom could I give or donate in my excess? So, you've agreed to share your space with somebody, which means that you have to share the storage and not encroach on other people's living space. And if your collection is starting to get in the way, then you're sort of breaking that contract with the person that you're living with to make space for both of you. And so that suggests a parameter of ways to limit the collection. It can't go into scrunching other people out of the house. And just as a thought experiment, it might be interesting to think about minimalist or utilitarian perspectives on this question. How many is too many? A minimalist might make the case for keeping the smallest number of items that you can reasonably use, store, and manage within any given category. A utilitarian might suggest that keeping anything in excess of the number that you can reasonably use is actively depriving someone else of the opportunity to use the thing. And so a minimalist would keep the smallest number, utilitarian would only keep what you can actually use reasonably, and the rest is too much. And so as you're trying to answer the question, how many is too many, think about somebody who's the exact opposite of you and what they would think is the amount that's okay to keep. It's going to be way less than you, way much lower than you. And it's just a point of reference to say, well, this minimalist person would keep this really, really small collection. How much?
Could manage with one watch. I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
like someone who's
Or two.
really, you're really dedicated to their minimalism might just have the one, because
I want to
if
watch.
it's if
Yeah.
it's plain and simple enough, it'll work with every outfit and do the
And then
one
the
job a
end.
watch needs to do. The end, yeah.
Yeah, and the end in collecting, right?
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Okay, what about factors that you may or may not wish to ignore as you're trying to decide how many is too many?
Okay, so we also thought you might want to ignore the opinions of others that don't live with you. So you do have to consider the opinions of people that live with you, not whether they love your collection or not, but you need to consider how they can comfortably live with your collection. They don't get to declare that your collection is useless or ridiculous, but they do get to declare how much living space they're willing to surrender to live with your collection. So the opinion of someone who doesn't live in your house is really low on the list. You can probably ignore those. And you may or may not want to ignore society's norms and averages. Just because an average American has 12 pairs of shoes, that doesn't mean you're bad or wrong if you have 30 pairs of shoes. If you enjoy buying them and wearing them and wrangling all those shoes and keeping them dusty and, if shoes are your thing, then the American average of 12 pairs per person is, doesn't really have to apply to you. So this is all circling back to where we started, which is I know you want an answer of what the parameter is, and we're reiterating it's based on you and what's important to you and where you live and how much time and energy you have to spend. It's all around your own perspective. And so hopefully we've helped you remember that and given you some other factors to consider as you go about managing your collections.
Well, and I think we should also touch on the topic of algorithms again,
Mm,
because we've given the example many times. When I was selling my house and decided that most of my books needed to go,
mm,
I didn't pick a number. I didn't say I'm going to keep this bookshelf and whatever will fit in it. I created a sorting algorithm. I said I'm only keeping a book if it meets these criteria, one, two, three, four. And for example, I bought it very recently and still expect to read it would be one criterion. Um, this is, there's a sentimental value to it. It was something I grew up with. It was a gift from someone very dear to me, and so on. And so the answer isn't necessarily you know, I can keep this collection until it fills this space, or
mm.
I can keep this collection until there are 20 items, but things can go into my collection as long as they fit these criteria I have laid out. And that's going to be up to you.
Right. And you made your algorithms around that with the express purpose of I'm moving in with somebody else. I'm surrendering all, I don't have room for all these bookcases. It is not going to be possible for me to maintain this collection and I don't have any interest in maintaining it anymore. And so, you were actively looking to drastically pare down the
Downsize.
collection.
Yeah.
And you did that. I mean, you set the algorithms around that.
Okay,
So
we have
they
time
don't have to be that aggressive.
time I think for one more comment, and this is a really good one I want to share. It's a little bit long.
Okay.
JB says, I think there is an emotional pull to stuff in general, but perhaps collections in particular. Their presence signifies abundance, free exercise of choice, and expression of taste, preferences, and even identity.
Mm,
They mark into seeming permanence times past whose memory comforts us, where now peace and fulfillment are lacking. We get to examine why we find these feelings or states of being deficient to begin with. For to some degree, we are projecting into externality something internal that could, oops, sorry, it jumped away from me. Something internal that could be called into wholeness, usually through an inventory of beliefs, perhaps the ultimate decluttering project.
ooh.
I like that.
Yeah, that was a very good perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Taking the time to write all that. That was long. Thanks for being in the chat that long.
Okay, let's talk about next week.
Okay.
Gotta find it. We're going to be back next week Tuesday, December 17th, for our final live webcast of
Of
2024.
2024.
This seems like a great time to be thinking about what we'd all like to accomplish in 2025. So we're going to talk about how to select and strategize an organizing project. Join us on December 17th at the usual time for Strategy for Success. Make a plan for a more organized 2025.
Can't believe it's that time of year already. Oh my gosh.
Gayle, why don't you give us the tittle?
Okay, this week's title is Set a Limit. This week's assignment is to decide what criteria will determine your limit on a collection that's getting out of control. If you didn't already take this week's survey, answer the following question. What collection or category of items in your home is in danger of crossing over into too many or too much? If you took the survey, you may stick with or revisit your answer to this question. Consider any factors we've discussed today that should weigh upon your decision to grow or limit the collection or category. For example, what are the space constraints? What is your budget for this category collection? How much work goes into storing, cleaning, and maintaining this category collection? What's the lifespan of items in this collection? And so on. We talked about all kinds of ways that you might filter the collection one way or the other. Now establish a limit for the number or volume of items that you plan to keep in the collection going forward. And then come and tell us about it. You know, we always want to hear about it next week. So come and tell us about how you experienced that, whether you felt like you could come up with a way to filter the collection that you think has gotten to be too much, too out of control, because we want to hear about it.
If you're watching this on YouTube, we would love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by visiting cfhou.com/Facebook, or join our mailing list by visiting cfhou.com/subscribe. We love to hear from you, so please keep your questions, comments, and topic suggestions coming on YouTube, Facebook, or anywhere that you find us. You can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you here coming every week to visit us. And also, I want to say thanks for, we've been getting a lot of email comments lately. People have been sort of giving us private tittle reports and private commentary on things that we've been doing. And so we always appreciate hearing from you guys separate. If it makes you too nervous to put your comments out into the world for other people to read, I'm happy to read them as an email. So thank you for taking time to do that. We will be back next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.